All right, everyone. Before I start, I'm just informing you guys about the new update and the agent guide with the growth training. And I still advise, and many content creators and the devs are still advising not to do these day 2 quests for equipping and upgrading a card, just in case the glitch is still persisting. The devs did acknowledge this mistake and they did work on a patch. The details are all here. It's basically saying that they're going to compensate you and they're going to put the card that was removed in your inventory so you can get your card back. But I don't know how long it's going to take for them to compensate everybody. But in the meantime, now that we got that out of the way, this video is going to cover Otherworld Battle. I'm going to give you guys a guide, and I'm going to showcase the different team-ups, character recommendations, and positions, and I'm going to go over the buffs. So right now, I'm just letting you know that the buffs that I'm applying on these characters are very, very important. Always want to get the remove purification stat that removes the AI's remove all debuffs. You want to get valor and vigor that increase their offense, and then you want to get maybe like HP could work, or another type of offensive buff. Offensive buffs are always good. You don't want to get the buffs that apply debuffs, because there's always another buff that you can get that can counteract that buff as well. So keep that in mind. On top of that, as you could see, there's a lot of debuff teams. The reason for this is because it's the beginning of the week reset. So the teams are going to be different, and they're going to change up, and they're going to debuff some meta, and they're going to rebuff other meta. So right now you could see that mutants are available, like Magic, Apocalypse, Gene, etc. But there's still a lot of debuff teams that people haven't changed, because they have to change it every single week. So you can capitalize and get yourself in Challenger if you utilize this little trick, right? So you can take advantage of debuff teams in the beginning of the week. That's going to be the key takeaway from the video. The key takeaway is how to get into Challenger, Edge Challenger really, and to stick with it. Because for most players, only the top 1% are going to compete. Because unlike Team Battle, where you could kind of glitch the auto system, or Timeline Battle, where you could play manually and stay safe if you know the tips and tricks that I also give for that, Otherworld Battle is completely stat-based, and if you know the positions that your characters should be in, it could be an advantage for you, but you're always going to run into some sort of stumbling block, because positions in Otherworld Battle vary so much that you can't really track an exact team selection, predict, and get the same outcome all the time. Because, of course, you also have to take CTPs into account. You have to take the buffs into account. You even have to take the tunes into account. So we went over the buffs. So let's go over the tunes. So I'm showcasing Otherworld Battle week by week. So you are seeing me for the first week put characters like Wolverine and like Apocalypse and like Sentry Atom and Null. So why do I do this? Well, I do this because, first of all, they're the top meta. Like 3 or 4 of them are already the top meta for the game mode. Then there's something that I acknowledge that you guys could either take with a grain of salt, or you could utilize it in your team. But basically, I think and I believe that a lot of debuff removal supports, while they're essential for many characters, they're not really essential for the revivers like Sentry, like Adam, like Surfer, even like Jean Grey, as much as it is important for the immortal characters. Because immortal characters need to stay alive for the full 7 seconds, and they need to stay under debuff removal. If they get debuff removal taken away from them, which is always possible, by the way, in this game mode, they become completely nullified. So with that in mind, right, because I'm not always going to succeed, but the takeaway, and you could see in my positions where I have Apocalypse as the second character and Wolverine as the first character, but Wolverine is behind Apocalypse. That doesn't really work. And it depends because of positionings, of course. But the trick with Logan is that he should get hit by the AI's X skill first. He should, because when he gets hit from the AI's X skill first, and what I mean by that is that at the start of every match on the 2v2, everybody does their X skill, the big X skill that nobody uses ever, but for some reason the AI uses it. So that is taken into effect, right? If that X skill has debuffs in it, Wolverine gets his debuffs triggered, and then he executes the fit skill properly. Now, in this case, I put Logan behind Apocalypse because I always want Logan to execute that skill no matter what. So I was thinking I want Logan to be protected, but Logan has to be first. If he's last, he's way more susceptible to interruption. So you have to really keep that in mind, because if your tunes get interrupted, they're basically useless. Like, look at that Spider-Man. He got totally interrupted, and he was completely nullified in one shot. And I believe, like in this scenario, right, Ghost Rider doesn't have debuff removal, but I put him first. When I put him first, even though he doesn't have debuff removal, he has a chance to execute the skill. So, how do I break this down in a simpler way? Well, you put characters in that you want their skills to be executed right away. So, characters that normally stand still, for example, on the top of my head, characters like Destroyer, even, or characters like Ultron. Those characters should be placed first. And, you know, someone like Logan or someone like Ghost Rider with one-shot potential should be paired like second as well. Because you want to get your hits off and you want to destroy meta as fast as possible, right? So if you're trying to compensate for a lack of debuff removal, right, because you don't want the debuff removal passive tune like Wasp, you could always do this method and it could still work more or less. Now, you could also follow the trend that the top 100 players do. That's okay too, because tactics in Otherworld Battle, they vary so much that nothing is really set in stone. So what I'm doing is that I'm making suggestions without giving like definitive answers. With Timeline Battle and Team Battle, I give definitive guides that give me success. Here, I'm just showcasing how I stay in Challenger and how I slowly prepped up to Challenger with various different setups that I had to use trial and error. So because I used trial and error, I could keep it in mind for the next season. But of course, not all debuff weeks are the same. So you have to build a very wide roster. You have to make sure that their CTPs are appropriate. The characters that need DPS and traditionally work with DPS CTPs, you give them DPS, brilliant. The characters that work with Conquest, you have to give them Conquest at brilliant. You need to know like what CTPs work in certain areas. So like if you want to give Emma an authority, you can. If you want to give Magic a conquest, you can. If you want to give Apocalypse a conquest, authority, greed, you can. It's recommended that they be brilliant because the higher your statistics, the higher chance you have to get into the top, 4,250, 4,300 in the league. On top of that, you really also have to pay attention to the stat increases or decreases that they put every season. So these stats could definitely vary. Sometimes they increase mutants' attack by 200. Sometimes they increase the attack received by 200. Sometimes they do this with universals. Sometimes they do this with blasts. Now, you would think that, for example, if universals attack inflicted got increased by 500%, for example, right? Which is, I believe, one of the stats in this particular season. You would think, okay, I can't put universals because they'll die too quickly. That's not necessarily true. You have to understand that PvP meta are definite in a sense where they're always going to be useful to you if they're built accordingly. So that's why you also see debuff tunes that still work and operate very, very well, like Sentry or like Null, because their damage is still applying even though they're debuffed. When they're debuffed, their health significantly decreases, but a lot of their damage stays the same. Unless, of course, there's a buff that decreases their damage. So if there's a buff that they put in the beginning of the season that decreases a certain character's damage by like 500, then usually that character ends up being nullified almost completely. It showcases how important damage actually is. So I also discussed the first two positions. So now, which characters do well in the third position? Well, characters that are in a short corner. So you have your far corners that are in the two ends of the board. You have your short corners that are in the two short ends on the bottom, and you have your middle. So you should put your two first tunes, one of them in the middle and one of them in a far corner that's protected, right? That's what I generally recommend. Then your third positioned tune should stay in a short corner on the bottom, ready to enact their counter or their ignore iframe from a certain distance. So you also have to keep in mind characters that have range on their skills. Or there are certain tunes like Magic, for example, that uses a counter skill from range, and then when someone hits her from range, she could use that counter from said range. Same thing with Apocalypse too. Apocalypse can be put in the middle, or Apocalypse can be put last because he has an ignore iframe with range. So for Apocalypse, for example, he can creep in, potentially super guard break the meta, and one-shot the meta depending on what CTP you have on him, right? You could also use awakened tunes that die, revive, and use their 6th skill. So characters like Cersei, characters like Rachel Summers, these tunes really do well at the third spot. Let me rephrase. Not the middle, like in the middle position. in the third spot. So that means that they're the third character coming in and creeping in to do like support DPS. Support DPS in the third spot is generally the recommendation. And I recommend like a Reviver tune, not an Immortal tune. Because an Immortal tune can easily get interrupted when they're creeping up from that third position. So the only one that works is Magic because she has range. But characters like Logan and at times characters like Ghost Rider, they get interrupted too frequently in that spot. And also Carnage. Carnage really gets interrupted in that spot. So if you know, though, that someone like Carnage for the week is one of your strongest tunes, then you should either put that character first or last. So for the fifth spot, I recommend a tune that's one of your strongest, that has a wide area of effect. So like someone like Mephisto or Ghost Rider, or you could use Carnage. But if you use someone like Carnage at the end, or you use someone like Adam at the end, which can work, then I would recommend for the last spots, or particularly the fifth spot. The fourth spot could be any spot. It's basically very similar to the third spot. The fifth spot should be in one of your far corners of the map, because you want that meta to creep in with range, like I said before, and not get interrupted at all, because that tune is going to clutch your match. So a recommended fifth place tune option is like Adam, Sentry, Null, Ghost Rider, Mephisto, maybe even like someone with a lot of one-shot ability like Spider-Man or like Quicksilver. All of these tunes can work in the fifth spot. Okay, now let's discuss the tunes themselves. So Sentry and Null and maybe Logan are the only ones that could be used when they're debuffed. Sentry and Null and Kang. Sentry and Null are debuffed majority of the season. So you have to keep that in mind. Hopefully they change that, since Kang is a real threatening meta. But so far, this is just how it is. But Sentry can be used as a debuff master on the field. So you could still use Sentry as a tune with debuff mastery that stun locks the entire field. And you could still use Null as a one-shotter. But you have to apply the tactics that I expressed in the beginning so you could use them appropriately, right? Then you have Surfer, Adam, Madeline Pryor, and Logan. These characters usually are debuffed, but they're debuffed a little bit less than Sentry and Null. So you're going to get 2 to 3 weeks in the season where Adam and Logan and maybe Surfer are dominating the week. You also have new characters, Kang and Pryor, who also get 3 to 4 weeks that they can dominate as well. Then you have the secondary meta like Ghost Rider, Carnage, Apocalypse, Spider-Man, and a few others. These characters are usually available at least half the season. So it shows that you have to really develop your roster, and it's highly recommended if you want to reach Challenger. Most of them have to be tier 4. Then you have your support class. So I'll consider this like a support like Hela, who could be a support and a DPS, or the traditional debuff removal passive meta. So Sue, Wasp, Strife, and Shalabal. So these characters are very, very important after the first week. So you need to build up these characters as well. And Wasp is free to play. So she's the easiest to build, and she arguably gives the best debuff removal support for the Immortal tunes that I specified greatly needed. And then once again, like I say, it's not that the Reviver tunes don't really need debuff removal. Of course they need debuff removal. It's just that most of them are now equipped with debuff removal in their own kit. So as long as they're continuously hitting, they should be clear. And when they die, they also have a clear shot without interruption. So as you can see with these various fights, I showcase a lot of wins to help prove my points to you that some of what I'm saying works, and that I'm staying in Challenger after various different trials. So, you know, there'll be seasons where I'll play, you know, a couple hundred matches for the whole season, and then there'll be a season where I stayed in Challenger most of the time and I only played maybe less than 100 matches. Let me also mention briefly about the leagues in Otherworld Battle. So what's weird about it is that you actually get easier matches the higher you go away from the other leagues. So if you get down to platinum, it's actually going to be a way harder time than a league in Challenger, because, for example, the debuff list becomes a little bit more lenient in the bottom leagues. But of course they're the bottom leagues, so there's going to be lesser builds. But the thing is that you're going to see plenty of tier 4s. So of course the question is, how are you going to get out of a league that you're stuck in, right? So this is why my tactics that I showcase here may be important to you, because you may be stuck in an Otherworld Battle loop that you don't know how to get out of. And the rewards for getting into Challenger are obviously better than for getting into Vibranium or Platinum. Okay, so let's talk about the characters that I feel have high importance in this mode versus low importance. So bear with me, I may be thinking and pausing a few times, but let's just set in stone the top 7. Sentry, Kang, Null, Adam, Logan, Surfer, Pryor. These characters are pretty much set in stone meta, maybe the lesser being like Silver Surfer out of all of them, but they're all pretty useful for the mode. Ghost Rider is very meta in this mode. Mephisto is pretty meta in this mode because he has the opportunity to execute. Carnage has really decreased value in this, and I think that a lot of symbiotes have decreased value because you're essentially putting 2 supports, Agent Venom and like Wasp, to compensate for them. And I just think that since Kang, they've just really been nullified to like very, very niche category. So then you have like someone like Apocalypse and someone like Deadpool and Magic. They're all very, very useful. Then you have Shala Ball and Emma Frost. They're very usable. And Emma Frost, though she needs to have a brilliant CTP, it's highly recommended, or else she could be a liability. Same with Spider-Man. He's either a huge asset or he's a huge liability. Same with Quicksilver. Huge asset or huge liability. So you have to place those specific characters, Emma, Spider-Man, Quicksilver, very, very specifically, or else they won't do well for you. Doctor Doom does well in this mode. Ultron, Hela, they can do okay. Destroyer does well in this mode. Sentinel does well in this mode. Cersei and Rachel Summers can do very well in this mode. Zombies like Captain America, Captain Marvel, and Weapon Hex can do very well in this mode. The Fantastic Four with Franklin's full artifact can also be very useful in this mode. But other meta that I may have categorized, like Juggernaut and like Punisher and like Black Widow, yeah, characters without revive outside of maybe Hulk with a conquest or Spider-Man with a conquest or Quicksilver, these characters struggle a lot. So you have to keep that in mind, that Otherworld Battle, usually only the best of the best cut it at that specific week. And usually they have to have a full set of PvP stats, not just a few. If you have like characters that have like the ignore iframe but don't have the defense, like I said, you have to put them first. So I could even try characters like Nova and like Silver Samurai, and I've seen generally good success with them despite them being non-revivers. So it's not that all hope is lost for them. It's that you have to tactically place them in an area where they're going to be useful for you. As you can see, I'm going through various different teams with a lot of variety. So basically all the tunes that I just stated, I basically fought. So I fought Ghost Rider, Deadpool, Prior, Doom. I fought robots. I fought zombies. I fought Warriors of the Sky. So you guys have a wide variety of how these battles can look with the statistics that and the tactics that are put in place and set in stone. So as you could see, I'm using characters like Destroyer and Sentinel as well, and they're taking down certain characters that, while they're using them right, the buffs that I showcased to you are applying to them. So universals are getting debuffed even despite the debuff tag not being put. So like I said, you have to expand your roster relatively well in order to succeed in Challenger. So the question remains, why should you be in Challenger Otherworld Battle? Well, it's nice to stay there as long as you can, but throughout the season, the rewards for Vibranium versus Challenger are pretty similar. So it's no biggie if you can't reach it for a couple of weeks while you prep up and you catch up. But it's important to end in Challenger at the end of the season. So if you maintain your position there and you build your roster accordingly, you will barely even have to play while you're in Challenger, and you just set the team up that gives you defense wins, and you'll easily maintain your spot while playing minimally, like 100 matches for the season, which is nothing. That's like, you know, you do your daily runs for the day and that's it. Of course, you want to get the nice crystal reward at the end of the season, and you also want to get as much warrior memento as you possibly can to get those really nice, juicy tier 4 materials that are always useful no matter what. Just in case, let me just briefly go over the CTPs that are recommended. So Conquest is definitely recommended for a lot of tunes here. Greed or Energy is also recommended if you want to just make your tunes straight up DPS. Egg is somewhat decent enough. Regen could work on specific immortal tunes like Hela to help plant specific traps that obviously remove the AI's skill and allow you for an attack opening. CTPs that don't really work like that unless they're serious meta and they're not debuffed. Authority doesn't really work that well unless it's on somebody like Thanos, but Thanos is not really good in this mode anymore. Like, once again, Regen and Egg have to be brilliant. They can't be less unless it's like Hella. Rage can somewhat work on certain tunes, but competition can't really. Of course, you don't want to have CTPs like Patience or Transcendence on your tunes. That won't really help you. And of course, Insight Liberation you'd want to put on your support tunes, especially your debuff removal passive ones. Well, as of now, except Strife, who's looking to get a new uniform very, very soon. What's actually great about this game mode that the devs should really implement on every PvP mode is the fact that this is susceptible to crashing, just like all of the other game modes. But you have the chance to replay that match when you get back into it. So you can't do that with Timeline Battle or with AC or with Team Battle, and you lose all your points. And a lot of times it's forcing a loss on you. So you'll be in the middle of a win and it'll crash. So that's the only good positive thing about this game mode, because otherwise this game mode is pretty freaking redundant and boring and tedious, and I think it needs to be more engaging somehow. Like, Team Battle Arena, I feel, is engaging. Timeline Battle, you can make it engaging if you want. This is not engaging. I look at the screen and all I see is what is like all I see is destruction. I can't even see the freaking screen. I can't detect like who killed who without like squinting my eyeballs as freaking short as I can to try to make out what is going on. And that's why I also hate these auto modes, because you're essentially being subjugated to a bunch of like flickering lights. You know, it's not really appealing. I really think that this is arguably the most least played mode in a generality of the entire game, because it is really dominated by the top 1%. Like, you cannot, or it is very rare, or you have to have a perfect account to even try to bypass that top 1% wall of perfection. You know, even the sub meta have brilliant conquests. Like, you would be really surprised at how competitive it can get, but only for a really, really select few. So don't sweat about getting top 100 in this mode. It is much easier to get top 100 in every other PvP mode except this one. All you need to do in this game mode is to stay in Challenger to get the rewards. If you want to push, you can, but you're going to have to play a lot of matches to get through that trial and error. And of course, you are going to hit some walls. So just keep that in mind. But of course, you know, have as much fun as you can with this mode. You get to see, you know, a lot of different teams and tunes in action. So that's what's good about it. It's not all bad, but I definitely think that this game mode should be reworked in some way so it could be more engaging and more people can compete, because I think that the same whales have just been dominating this game since it arrived in 2023. So with that in mind, I'm going to wrap it up here. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys have any questions, let me know. If you think my tactics are a little off, let me know. We can discuss it. If you have some suggestions, you know, let the world know. Let people hear your story about your Otherworld Battle exploits and how far you've gotten, or what crazy sub-meta tune you've used with like some crazy CTP, because it's possible. We need some more diversification and some excitement in this game. This game is losing its edge and its excitement. So if people are just playing this game as a chore to get rewards, it kind of sucks. But if it can't be fixed, at least here I provide some tactics for you to stay in the respective league and get ahead. So with that in mind, guys, I know that you want me to release the guides. Now, after this video, the guides are high priority. So stay tuned for that, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.